Hey, I'm Alex Rackle from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Hooky from Rio Grande Games. Hooky is a 3 to 5 player deduction game, a word game as it were, in which you're trying to figure out what the players, what 3 kids are playing Hooky. Basically, you have a deck of 26 cards. Those 26 cards all have names and specifically letters in them. So for example, we have Chaya over here with the C over there, and then C is going to be her letter, and that's really the only thing that matters. The kid aspect is more thematic. And so we have I, M, C, F, V. Those are our 5 cards. The other players in the game all have their 5 cards. Then there's 3 cards set to the side, which are the 3 kids who are playing Hooky, and those 3 cards are going to be revealed at the end of each of round 1, 2, and 3, and then you're going to start making guesses across these 6 rounds of play. That's the basic setup. You're trying to figure out which 3 kids are playing Hooky, and then ideally getting bonus points for all the other players and the letters they have in their hands. To that end, you're going to start the game by giving off a letter, a word, a 5-letter word associated with your specific cards. So for example, I have I, M, C, F, V. I'm going to go ahead and say them, no. There, no. I'll do friend, F-R-I. That's a 6-letter word. That is a 6-letter word. Is it? I-E. I can't do words anymore. Let's do China. Let's do China. So I'm going to do China over here. We're going to write China. Okay. And now, for my starting word, I have 2. I have a C and an I. I don't have the rest. So I'm going to say my starting word is China, and 2 of my letters are there. Generally, you're going to want to start your starting word with 1 letter, but, you know, I'm on the spot here. I'm trying to do what I can. All the other players are going to do so, and you're going to go ahead and start recording their names and what their words are, so you start having an idea of what there are. So, for example, maybe somebody else went ahead and they put down, I generally can't think of any 5-letter word anymore, they put down, I don't know, round. They put down round. Okay, let's say they put down round, and they have 1 in there. Okay, so they have from those words over there, from the R's, O, U, and D, they have 1 of those letters, which already gives us information because they don't have 2, they don't have 3. So for example, if we go ahead and give them a guess later, which we'll do shortly, but let's actually start moving to that. Once we're down with the first starting words, players are going to take turns selecting a player and then giving them a word. So for example, I select player B, and I go, is your word, not what, they tell me I'm going to use the word pound, okay? And now, if they go ahead once more and put down 1, well actually, the truth is, if they put down 1 again, then it probably was not the R, but it also could be that they have an R and a P and none of the O, U, and D. But maybe go ahead and put down 1. The chances are, decent chances of O, U, and D there and not a P or R. There's a decent chance of that, but you never really know. You're going to start going ahead, and maybe next turn I go ahead and I do proud. Let's say they do proud, and let's see what they got there. And now with proud, they have 2 letters there. Is that even possible? I guess so, maybe. I guess if that was actually the case, maybe it has to be the P and the R. Maybe the O could have been taken out. I'm not entirely sure. You'd have to go ahead and start trying to figure it out. But every single round, you're going to go ahead, on your turn, you're going to go ahead and ask one player, you're going to give them a word, a 5-letter word, and they're going to tell you how many letters from their hand are in that word. That's what they're going to do. Players are all going to do that, and that's a full round. At the end of round 1, you're going to remove this card. We're going to reveal that A is not in the picture. By the way, it's also worth noting, you obviously know that your 5 letters are not any of theirs. You might want to start crossing them out. If over here, player 2, I might want to start crossing out the I, the M over here. I know those aren't theirs. The C's not theirs. The F isn't there. The V isn't theirs. And now I know the A isn't theirs either. And that starts reducing the amount of options on the table. You can go ahead on your turn and choose any player to guess their word and try to get information from them by giving them a 5-letter word that will help you deduce what their letters are. Although knowing their letters is worth bonus points, it's not the main source of points. Because across the course of the game, across the first 2 rounds, you're going to go ahead, the first 3 rounds, you're going to reveal additional letters that are out of play. But then, starting in round 4, you're going to start making guesses. At the end of round 4, you're going to guess what letters you think are the Hooky letters. And that's going to be dependent on what all players have answered. Again, you know none of these are, but maybe across the guessing, you realize that the P over there really doesn't seem to be anyone's letter. So maybe I guess P, and maybe I also go ahead and add an L and an S over here. Those are the letters that don't seem to be coming up that much in the other players, and so I put that as my first guess. At the end of round 5, you go ahead and do a second guess. Maybe that P has actually started to show up, so now I'm just going to go ahead and do BLS instead. Okay, maybe those are the words. And maybe at the end of the 3rd round, I completely change it up. I'm going to keep the P back. The P is actually back in play, I think. But we're going to go ahead and do O, and then, you know, a T over here. It's pot. Pot are the final things. And then you're going to go ahead and reveal what they are over here. And they are J, H, and K. I was way off. Also, I wasn't really trying here. But that's basically the process of what you're going to go ahead and do. Across the rounds of play, you're trying to figure out what letters are out of play by giving guesses that will narrow down what the other players have. And by extension, if you can figure out what all the other players have and the letters out of play, you'll be able to deduce which letters are out of play and which kids are playing Hooky. Additionally, you're going to get points for the following. You're going to be able to go ahead and guess all the opponent's letters. So maybe I'm really sure that, you know, that D is really 100%, well, the D's over here. So maybe I'm really sure that the, you know, the O and the U are really that players. You're going to start marking down in this grid which letters belong to which other players, and you're going to get a point per correct letter, and an additional point if you got all of their letters correct. This is where you also have the difference between a 3 and a 5 player game. A 4 player game has every 4 player having 5 letters, 3 that are revealed, and 3 that are set up to the side, so you have 26 total. And in the 3 player game, you're going to go ahead and give each player 7 letters, and only have 2 that are revealed and more coming out. Still 3 out at the end, but each player gets an additional letter. And then a 5 player game, you reduce the amount of words, so you always have just the reconfiguration of how many letters players have, although you're always playing with 5 letter words. That's basically how you play Hooky. You're going across 6 rounds of play. You're going to start with a starting guess that'll give you some information. Then you're asking other players the specific questions about words, and they're answering how many letters they have from that word, which will start narrowing things down. It's worth noting that if you do a double letter word, let's say you do, can't think of level. Let's say you do level, and the person has an L. That L counts twice because of the level. In fact, if they have an L and E, they're going to say 4 out of 5, which is going to tell players that there's an L and an E inherently in that conversation. But either way, that is basically how you play Hooky, which means it's time for a review, starting off with ease of play. Rules are pretty easy to pick up on this one. It's basically asking players questions, and then just from there, it's just, you know, the distribution of numbers and cards. They have all the information you need on this handy-dandy, you know, play area that's going to go in front of your screen so that everything is completely secret from other players, and you can both, you know, make your guesses safe from other players, but also have all the information you need printed out over here. This is really everything you need to know for the course of the game. You need the rulebook to teach the game, but this will teach players everything they need to know to keep themselves up and running as they play through it. Gameplay ranges, depends on the players how long they take, but I'd say around 30 to 45 minutes is your typical game, and it could range based on the player count, but it's mostly a 4-player game ideally. 3 to 5 is a little, well, we'll talk more about that throughout the course of the review. So let's start from there. Let's go ahead to what I like, starting off with the deduction in general. This is a deduction game. Hooky is a deduction game which you're trying to gather information, piece together what additional questions to ask, take into account your own information, what you know, what the other players are, what the other players have in their hands, what the other players are even asking, which is where you start to get into layers of the game. Based on even just listening what player 1 asks, that might give me more information about what player 1 does not have, although they might be mindful of that, and they might specifically be asking questions based on letters they have in their own hand. They might throw an M into their word because that gives them secret information, because if I ask you a word, if I ask player 2 a word that has an M in it, and I know that M is one of mine, it has 2 benefits. One is, I know that M is not your word, so I'm actually asking about 4 letters and not 5, it narrows the information. 2 is, you as the other players watching don't know that M is my word, so they might get less information from it than me, and may think that I don't have M in my hand. You start getting into levels of double think as you go through this, of deduction, of the process as you try to figure out how to figure out what other players have, while revealing as little as possible on your own self. There's also that iterative aspect of guessing, that you're going to be guessing over multiple rounds. You're going to be having, in rounds 4, 5, and 6, you're going to be deducing the letters. I didn't really say this part, but you get 5 points over here. For each of the first guesses, you get 5 points for each correct letter, and for the last one, you get 10 points for each correct letter. So you are rewarded for figuring it out earlier, but ultimately the final guess is where it matters the most. And there's an additional element as you go through the game where you can give up cards from your hand. Basically, if I have these cards in my hand, and I can tell based on what people are asking that everyone thinks I have an M, I'll go ahead and drop that M in play, and then ask to see a card from another player's hand, and I'll go ahead and reveal it, and I know that player 2 has a G. That gives me additional information that other players may not have, although the flip side is it may reveal a card that was one of the letters that I was sure they have, because as you play through the game, you're going to start developing patterns. You'll be like, I'm pretty sure you have an O and a D, but the other 3 letters I'm not sure, and if you reveal an O, which is just the randomness of how it plays out, it means I'm getting less information from it. But that means there's an additional aspect, a trade-off, of even as you figure out my hand, I can use that to acquire more information when I'm not even losing anything for it. So there's a fun little deductive aspect across the rounds of play as you try to figure out what other players have, as you try to ask them based on the answer they've given. It's almost like Wordle combined with deduction, but not really Wordle because you don't know the exact place the letters are in. It's just basically, you know, a deduction game of trying to figure out who's out of play and who's in play through asking questions. As far as what I don't like in the game, the 4-player count seems to be where the game's at. At 3 and 5 players, there's an inconsistency in the fact that you're playing a game that is based on asking 5-letter words, but the players don't have 5 letters in your hand. It's a little bit mentally jarring to play through that. You're like, I'm asking you 5-letter questions, but really you have 7 letters in your hand. I find 4 players plays the smoothest, and 3 and 5 functions totally fine, but 3 and 5 does so with a little bit less smoothness to the feeling of how the game plays out. So I think this plays best as a 4-player experience. Additionally, I'll say that dealing with uncommon letters in the game is annoying. When you have letters like X and Z and Y and J and all those things, well, Y is more common. If you have a J in someone's hand, the practical reality is those letters show up less frequently, and they're harder to throw into words, which means trying to deduce information about them tends to be a little bit more obscure. If a player has an X and a Z in their hand, it is less likely that those letters will show up just through the course of naturally coming up with words, which either gives them an unfair advantage or just throws off the entire schema. I almost wish they had taken some of those letters out of play or figured out a different way to incorporate them, because they throw things off a little bit as you go through it. As far as what I can see others not liking the game, there's definite guesswork involved in this game. This whole entire game is guesswork, but ultimately you're trying to deduce the best you can and try to figure it out. But the fact that you don't have that system that you often have in these styles of games, where you have the knowledge of a specific letter in the right place as you go through it, that changes the conversation a bit in terms of you can't perfectly predict or narrow it down. It's not a purely logical puzzle. It's a lot more about the feeling as you go through it, but there's so many ways you could be right or wrong that it's very hard to narrow it down with precision. It's more about trying to find patterns and trying to see if you can deduce it with enough information at your disposal. Additionally, I'll say that you can choose a player to be targeted. If you're playing a 4-player game, it's not the craziest thing for one player to frequently be getting guesses thrown at them, because what happens in the game is as you start to see more information about a player, it tends to be easier to try and narrow it down and give you more information, and sometimes there's a little bit of piling onto somebody as their information starts to become revealed. That does have the additional trade-off that now there's less incentive for them to hold on to their cards, and they can start playing cards down to start getting information from other players, but still, there is that small aspect of being targeted throughout the game. As far as final thoughts on Hooky, I overall enjoy this one. This is a deduction game that gives you fun vibes of deduction games. It's a puzzle. I like puzzles. I like word puzzles. I like games like Wordle. I like games like Master Word or Search for Planet X. I like deduction in games, and this gives you deduction in a fun little word game of throwing 5-letter words at your opponents as you try to piece together the information. I think it does it well. While I don't have a good answer for this, I think this feels more like a pure deduction game than a deduction thrown into a board game. I enjoy the puzzle of what it's done, but the fact that it plays specifically best at 4 players, and the fact that it does have a lot more guesswork and a lot less, narrowing things down, does take a little bit away from how I feel about it. I have fun with this one, and I like what it does, and it manages to do a deduction in a way that is both similar and different at the same time, while also I think the biggest thing that throws me off is it's harder for me to feel like I'm really working my way towards perfect information, and more so it feels like I'm gathering information and then making the best out of what I can, which is something that takes a little bit away from how much I enjoy this. Overall, for me, it's a 3.5 out of 5. I like what Hooky's doing. It's different. It's charming. It's very charming as far as every character being associated with a letter and all that. It's a charming experience. It's a good deduction game. A 3.5 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Search for Planet X, which I mentioned already. If you're looking for a deduction game that's going to give you that sense of deduction as you go through it, that has that sense of asking questions and getting information and utilizing it towards your advantages, Search for Planet X very much has that. And if you're looking for a word game that gives you a much higher degree of precision as you actually have the chance to narrow things down and figure out what's even in the right place as you go through it, Master Word is a great game that takes the older game Mastermind and translates into a word game that really holds up and gives you that same feeling with a drop more of actually narrowing down the guesses as you go through the experience. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.